You ever look around and feel like everyone's shouting just to be heard? In a world overflowing with noise, where ego parades as confidence and performance is confused with purpose, something powerful often goes unnoticed. True strength, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need applause, likes, or a stage. See, we've been taught to associate strength with dominance. Big voices, big muscles, big statements. But the ancient Stoics, they saw things differently. They believed real strength isn't something loud. It's something lived. It's not about how much weight you can lift or how many followers you have. It's about how well you can carry yourself when life gets heavy. To them, strength meant being the master of your own mind. It meant remaining grounded when storms come, staying true to your values when no one's watching, and not letting someone else's bad behavior pull you out of alignment with who you are. Weakness, on the other hand, that reveals itself in the smallest, most telling ways. Not in what someone says, but in how they react. In their desperate need to be liked. In their refusal to take ownership when things fall apart. You see it in the person who explodes over a minor inconvenience, the one who constantly adjusts their personality to fit in, or the one who always blames others but never looks in the mirror. Here's the hard truth. You can wear confidence like a costume, but life will eventually test what's underneath. And when it does, what's real, what's strong, will show. So will what's weak. That's why this video matters. Because today, I'm walking you 8 behaviors that instantly expose a weak person and how to transform them into strength, even if, on the outside, they look strong. And more importantly, we'll talk about how to transform those habits into something powerful, something rooted, something unshakable. And look, I'm not here to judge. This isn't about pointing fingers. This is about self-awareness. Because if you're human, chances are you've done at least one of these things. I know I have. And catching them early is how we grow, how we rise, how we go from being reactive to intentional, from insecure to grounded, from weak to truly strong, by Stoic standards, not society's. So if you're tired of pretending, if you want to build a strength that doesn't need to shout, that can't be shaken by critics, chaos, or the highs and lows of life, then this is for you. Let's begin the journey inward, where real power lives. 1. Emotional reactivity. Let me ask you something. Have you ever let one rude comment ruin your whole day? Maybe someone cut you off in traffic, or left a passive-aggressive remark at work, or made a joke that hit a little too close to home. And just like that, your mood shifted, your peace vanished, your mind kept replaying the moment over and over again. That right there is what the Stoics called emotional reactivity, and it's one of the clearest signs of inner weakness. Now, I don't say that to shame anyone. We've all been there. I've been there. But here's the thing. When your emotions are at the mercy of the outside world, you're not in control. The world is. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and one of the great Stoic minds, put it perfectly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Think about that. You don't control the traffic. You don't control other people's words, moods, or actions, but you do control what happens next inside you. An emotionally reactive person is like a ship without an anchor. Every wave, every storm, every wind of criticism or discomfort knocks them off course. They explode in anger, drown in anxiety, or spiral into resentment because they've handed the steering wheel of their life to something or someone outside of them. But the Stoic feels the same emotions. Yes, they get angry, they get hurt, they feel the sting like anyone else. But here's the difference. They don't let those emotions drive. They don't let the storm decide where their ship goes. They choose their response. That kind of restraint isn't weakness, it's power. Because in a world where everyone's reacting, shouting, snapping back, the person who pauses, reflects, and responds with intention, that person stands out. That person commands respect, not through noise, but through mastery. So the next time someone pushes your buttons, ask yourself, am I giving them my power, or am I choosing to hold it? Because the strength you're looking for, it doesn't come from controlling the world. It comes from controlling yourself. And that, my friend, is where the journey to real strength begins. 2. Craving validation and approval. Let's be honest. How many times have you changed the way you talk, the way you act, or even what you believe, just to fit in? Maybe it was at work, in a friend group, or even online. You sensed the vibe and you shifted to match it, just so you wouldn't rock the boat. Just so people would like you. Understandable, right? But here's the thing. That's not strength. That's survival mode. And when your identity depends on approval, you're living a life that's borrowed, not built. We all want to be accepted. That's human. But when the need to be liked turns into a need to perform, to constantly shapeshift just to earn a compliment or rack up likes online, we slowly lose who we really are. Seneca, one of the great Stoic thinkers, said, "The approval of others is a poor substitute for self-respect." And he was right. You see, when you're driven by applause, you're never in control. You're always chasing the next hit of validation. Today it's praise, tomorrow it's silence. And suddenly your self-worth crumbles because no one's clapping. But true strength, it doesn't beg for applause. It walks into a room without needing to be seen because it knows who it is. Think about the most magnetic people you've met. The ones who don't talk the loudest, don't show off, don't try too hard, but still somehow hold your attention. Why? Because their energy says, I'm grounded. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to be real. That kind of presence only comes when your self-worth isn't rented out to opinions, when you're not a different person depending on the crowd. It's tempting to chase approval, especially today, when social media trains us to measure our value in likes, shares, and shallow praise. But the deeper truth, approval is fleeting, integrity lasts. So here's the question. Would you rather be liked or respected? Because respect doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from being someone solid even when others don't understand it, especially then. When you stop trying to be everyone's favorite, you start becoming your true self. And paradoxically, that's when people start respecting you most. 3. Avoiding responsibility. Here's a question we all need to ask ourselves from time to time. When life goes wrong, where do I point my finger? At the world or at myself? Because here's the truth. One of the clearest signs of inner weakness is this: always looking for someone else to blame. We all know people like this. Maybe we've even been them at some point. The job sucks, it's the boss. The relationship failed, it's the other person's fault. They're broke, it's the economy, the system, their parents, their ex. And look, sometimes life is unfair. Sometimes people do let you down. Stoicism doesn't deny that. But it does teach us something radically empowering. Even if it's not your fault, it's still your responsibility. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said it best. Don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. Why? Because you can't control what happens to you, but you can always control how you respond. Think about that. When we sit around waiting for circumstances to change, or for others to finally do right by us, we hand over our power. We become passive participants in our own lives, spectators, not players. But strength? Strength begins the moment you stop waiting and start moving. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Start asking, what can I do with this? That mindset alone separates the resilient from the resentful. It's what turns victims into leaders. It's what keeps a person growing even when the world is falling apart. Let me give you an example. Two people lose their jobs. One blames the company, the market, their manager, and does nothing. The other says, all right, this is hard, but what's next? What can I learn? How can I adapt? Fast forward a year, And they're in two entirely different places, not because of luck, but because of responsibility. The weak wait for the world to change. The strong change themselves first. And you know what? That shift from blaming to owning, it's not easy. It requires humility. It requires courage. But it's the only path to real strength. So the next time you're tempted to blame, pause and ask yourself, what if I took full ownership of this, starting now? Because your power doesn't come from controlling the world, it comes from controlling your response to it. And that's where transformation begins. 4, living for applause. Let's talk about applause. Not the kind you hear at concerts or speeches, but the kind you quietly crave in everyday life. The likes, the compliments, the approval from people who barely know you. It feels good, doesn't it? But here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If your identity depends on applause, then someone else owns your confidence. I want you to think about that. If you can only stay motivated when someone's watching, if you only show discipline when there's a reward, if your sense of self rises and falls based on what others think of you, then you're not living for purpose. You're performing for validation. And that's not strength. That's slavery with a smile. We see it all the time. People dressing, speaking, posting, not from a place of principle, but to get attention, to feel seen. They've built an entire version of themselves around what others might clap for. But here's the hard part. Applause fades. People's opinions change. The crowd moves on. And if your strength isn't built from within, you'll collapse the moment the cheering stops. Real strength, it moves in silence. It doesn't need an audience to stay disciplined. It doesn't need likes to stick to a standard. Think of the person who wakes up early, works out, stays on their goals, whether or not anyone notices. They're not doing it for Instagram. They're doing it because that's who they are. That's self-respect. That's real confidence. And ironically, that's the kind of person people end up admiring the most. Not because they tried to impress anyone, but because they didn't have to. So here's a question worth sitting with. Are you living to impress or living to express? Because when you constantly seek applause, you're building a life on shifting sand. But when you live from conviction, from values, from silence, you become unshakable. I'm not saying it's easy. Most of us have been conditioned since childhood to seek approval, to perform for gold stars, praise, likes. But here's the pivot point. Once you realize you don't need it, you start reclaiming your power. So today, let the applause go. Let the need to be liked go. Because the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows who they are, even when no one's clapping. 5, avoiding conflict and saying yes to everything. Let's talk about something we've all done. Saying yes when deep down, we wanted to say no. Maybe it was a friend asking for a favor you didn't have time for, or a coworker dumping work on your plate while you smiled and said, "Sure, no problem." Or maybe it was laughing at a joke that crossed the line just to avoid looking too sensitive. At first glance, it seems harmless, polite even. But when it becomes a pattern, when you start agreeing just to avoid tension, you're no longer being kind. You're being compliant at the cost of your character. Here's the truth. Weakness often hides behind a smile and the word yes. And I say that with no judgment because I've been there. Many of us have learned that conflict is dangerous, that rejection is scary, that if we just go along with what others want, we'll be safe. But the price of constant people-pleasing, it's heavy. You lose your voice, you lose your values, and slowly, without realizing it, you lose yourself. The Stoics taught that a good life isn't one where you're liked by everyone. It's one where you stay true to your principles, even when it's uncomfortable. Because here's the thing, respect doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from being anchored. It comes from the person who's not afraid to say, "That doesn't sit right with me. I'm not okay with that." Or simply, "No." It doesn't mean you're rude. It means you've drawn a line. And when you do that, people may not always like you, but they'll learn to respect you. Now, I know setting boundaries feels risky. You might lose approval. You might upset someone. But ask yourself this: what's more painful, momentary rejection or long-term regret for not standing your ground? When you say yes to avoid discomfort, you're saying no to your own peace. But when you honor your limits, when you stay rooted in who you are, you create space for real relationships, built on truth, not performance. So the next time you're about to say yes, pause, check in with yourself. Ask, is this aligned with who I am, or am I afraid of what will happen if I say no? Because the strongest version of you isn't the one who avoids every conflict. It's the one who speaks with quiet courage, even when your voice shakes. 6, blaming others for their problems. Let's get real for a second. We all know someone who has a story for why their life is stuck. A bad boss, a toxic ex, unfair parents, a broken system. And every time you talk to them, it's the same theme. It's not my fault. Now here's the twist. They're not entirely wrong. Life is unfair sometimes. People do hurt you. Systems can fail. But here's where strength and weakness split paths. The weak stay in the story. The strong rise beyond it. You see, when you blame everyone else for your problems, you feel justified. You feel safe. You feel seen. But you also stay stuck because you've handed over the keys to your life. And the worst part? You don't even realize it's happening. Every time you say, I can't move forward because of what they did, you've made your progress dependent on people who might never apologize, never change, and never care. That's a powerless way to live. But the Stoics had a different approach. They believed that freedom begins the moment you take full ownership, even if the pain wasn't your fault. As the saying goes, strong men look in the mirror, not out the window. Because the mirror doesn't lie, it shows you what you can control. And once you shift your focus from blame to responsibility, your life starts to change. Let me be clear. Taking ownership isn't about blaming yourself for things beyond your control. It's about asking a deeper question. What can I do next? You were laid off. Okay, now what? They betrayed your trust. What boundaries will you build from that? Life dealt you a rough hand. What will you do with what's left in your grasp? That mindset doesn't just build resilience, it builds character. And here's something I've learned from experience. The people who rise the fastest aren't the ones who've been dealt the best cards. They're the ones who stopped waiting for the world to change and started changing themselves. So if you catch yourself replaying your pain, fishing for sympathy, or retelling the same sad story over and over, pause. Ask yourself, is this helping me move forward or just keeping me from owning the next chapter? Blame is comfortable. Responsibility is heavy. But that weight, that's what builds real strength. The moment you stop pointing fingers and start raising your hand to say, this is mine to face, that's the moment everything begins to shift. 7, being afraid to say no. Let me ask you something. How many times have you said yes when everything in you wanted to say no? You didn't have the time, the energy, or even the desire, but you still nodded, smiled, and agreed just to keep the peace, just to avoid that sinking feeling of letting someone down. We've all done it, and for a while it feels like the nicer thing to do. But here's the hard truth. Every time you say yes to please others, but no to yourself, you chip away at your self-respect. It starts small. A favor you didn't want to do, a commitment you didn't have room for, a boundary you didn't speak up about. But over time, those little compromises become your default setting. And one day you wake up realizing you're no longer living your life. You're living the life others designed for you because you were too afraid to say no. Now let's be clear, saying no doesn't make you selfish. It makes you self-respecting. Weak people avoid saying no because they fear rejection more than they fear regret. They'd rather stretch themselves thin than risk disappointing someone. But the problem is, when you live to avoid disappointing others, you end up constantly disappointing yourself. The Stoics taught that if you don't control your time, your energy, and your values, someone else will. And when you're too agreeable, too available, and too afraid to draw a line, people will shape your life for you, not out of malice, but because you never told them where the line was. Boundaries are not walls, they're anchors. They keep you centered. They protect your peace. They define where you end and the world begins. And when you finally start saying no, not out of anger, but out of clarity, you don't lose people. You lose the illusion that saying yes is the only way to be loved or respected. So here's a challenge for you. Next time someone asks for something you're not okay with, pause. Take a breath. And instead of reacting from fear, ask yourself, will this yes cost me more than it's worth? Because your time is finite, your energy is sacred, and if you don't honor them, no one else will. The strongest people aren't the ones who never face pressure. They're the ones who know when to say no, and say it with confidence, clarity, and calm. 8. Being a slave to pleasure and emotion. Let's be honest, we live in a world that worships pleasure. Fast food, fast likes, fast hookups. And everywhere you turn, someone's telling you to follow your feelings, chase the high, do what feels good. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. If you're ruled by your emotions, your cravings, or your impulses, you're not free. You're a slave. Let that sink in. Weak people aren't weak because they don't feel deeply. They're weak because they act without thinking. They explode in anger at the smallest offense. They can't go a day without indulgence. Whether it's lust, junk food, distraction, or validation, they react instead of respond. They chase the instant hit, even if it sabotages their long-term peace. And on the surface, it looks like freedom, but it's not. It's chaos wearing a smile. The Stoics taught that real freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's having the strength to govern yourself. Because let's be real, anyone can give in. Anyone can click, swipe, yell, escape, indulge. But it takes power to pause, to choose intention over impulse, to master your emotions instead of letting them master you. Ask yourself this: have you ever regretted not reacting emotionally? Think about it. Most of our biggest regrets come from moments when we didn't stop to think, when we let anger lead, when we let desire blind us, when we let the moment win over the mission. Self-mastery isn't about being cold or robotic. It's about being grounded. It's about feeling deeply, but not being driven blindly by those feelings. You can feel anger without letting it dictate your actions. You can feel desire without letting it derail your discipline. That's real power. And here's what no one teaches us growing up. Discipline is not restriction. Discipline is liberation. Because the more you master yourself, the less the world can control you. You're no longer a puppet to your emotions or a prisoner of your urges. You walk through life with clarity, peace, and purpose. So if you've been chasing the next hit of pleasure, hoping it'll fill the void, it won't. That emptiness can only be filled by becoming someone you respect when no one's watching. The strongest man isn't the one who feels nothing. It's the one who feels everything, but still stays in control. Let me leave you with something to think about. In today's world, it's easy to look strong, but much harder to be strong. You see it everywhere. Men with the body, the image, the followers. But behind it all, no backbone, no discipline, no inner compass. And look, I'm not saying this to judge. I'm saying it because I've seen it. I've lived it. At some point, we've all chased the illusion of strength, hoping it would fill the void. But the truth, real strength isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't need to be seen. Real strength is quiet. It's built in silence, in early mornings, in moments of restraint, in decisions no one else sees but you. You're not weak because you've stumbled. You're not weak because you've made mistakes, lost control, or fallen short. You're only weak if you decide to stay down. What makes a person strong, what makes them stoic, isn't perfection. It's the decision to rise, again and again and again, to stop blaming, to stop chasing applause, to stop reacting, and instead to reflect, to take ownership, to lead your life with courage, calm, and conviction. This message isn't here to shame you. It's here to wake you up, because we need more men, and more people in general, who live from the inside out, who know who they are, who don't flinch when tested, who can feel pain, pressure, even humiliation, and still respond with principle. That's Stoic strength. It's not built in one day. It's forged in every small decision you make, every emotional storm you ride out without losing yourself. So I'll ask you now, what part of your life are you handing over to impulse, to fear, to approval? And what would happen if starting today, you took it back? Share your answer. Share your story. Not because you need to prove anything, but because others need to see that they're not alone. Your growth might just become someone else's permission to grow too. If this message spoke to something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Let me know where you're on the journey. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more calm, grounded wisdom rooted in the timeless philosophy of the Stoics. Until next time, stand tall, stay centered, and as always, remain unshaken.